Sunday morning, 1955. Church bells echo across every American neighborhood as families in their finest clothes walk purposefully toward white steeples that pierce the sky like monuments to faith. Nearly 95% of Americans claim Christianity as their religion, making the United States the undisputed Christian powerhouse of the world. Fast forward to today, and those same church bells ring to half-empty pews while mosques, temples, and meditation centers rise in communities that once knew only Christian hymns. What happened? How did the nation that once exported missionaries to every corner of the globe, that printed "In God We Trust" on its currency and declared itself one nation under God, quietly surrender its crown as Christianity's global fortress? The answer lies not in a single dramatic moment, but in a slow-motion revolution that has been reshaping the spiritual landscape of America for decades. It's a story of demographic earthquakes, generational rebellions, and an unexpected plot twist that would make even the most seasoned historian pause in disbelief. Let's travel back to 1776, when the very foundation of America was being laid. The Founding Fathers, despite their complex relationship with organized religion, built a nation that would become Christianity's most powerful ally. By the 1950s, America had achieved something unprecedented in modern history, a Christian civilization that was both deeply religious and incredibly prosperous. Billy Graham filled stadiums with 100,000 believers. Churches were so integral to American life that being an atheist was virtually social suicide. The numbers tell a staggering story. In 1950, approximately 91% of Americans identified as Christian. The United States housed the largest Protestant population on Earth, with over 150 million believers. American missionaries outnumbered those from any other nation by a ratio of nearly 3 to 1. Christian publishing houses, radio stations, and later television networks made America the epicenter of global Christian media. When the world thought of Christianity, it thought of America. But beneath this spiritual empire, tectonic shifts were already beginning. The first crack appeared in the 1960s, though few recognized it at the time. The counterculture movement didn't just challenge political authority, it questioned all authority, including religious. Young Americans who had grown up in the most Christian nation on earth began asking uncomfortable questions. Why were Christian churches silent during the civil rights movement? If Christianity preached love, why was there so much hate? The Vietnam War, fought by a predominantly Christian nation, left many wondering if their faith was being used to justify violence. By 1972, something unprecedented happened. For the first time in American polling history, the percentage of Americans who attended church weekly dropped below 50%. It was a subtle change, barely noticed by most, but historians would later mark it as the beginning of the end of Christian America. The 1980s brought a fascinating paradox. While evangelical Christianity gained enormous political power under Ronald Reagan, actual church attendance continued its steady decline. The moral majority made headlines, but the data told a different story. Americans were becoming increasingly comfortable calling themselves Christian without actually practicing the faith. The gap between cultural Christianity and genuine belief was widening. Then came the scandals. Jim Bakker's fall from grace in 1987 sent shockwaves through evangelical America. The subsequent parade of fallen televangelists, sexual abuse cover-ups, and financial corruption in megachurches created what sociologists call institutional trust decay. Each scandal drove more Americans away from organized religion, particularly younger generations who had grown up watching their heroes crumble. But the real earthquake was demographic. In 1965, the Hart-Celler Immigration Act changed everything. Suddenly, America wasn't just receiving European Christians anymore. Millions of Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, and Sikhs began calling America home. By 2000, there were more Muslims in America than Episcopalians. Hindu temples in suburban Atlanta outnumbered Baptist churches in some zip codes. The religious monopoly was broken. The internet delivered the final blow to Christian America's dominance. Young Americans now had access to every religious tradition, philosophy, and spiritual practice on earth. Why stick to the Christianity of their parents when they could explore Buddhism, practice yoga, or simply declare themselves spiritual but not religious? By 2010, this last category had become one of the fastest growing religious identifications in America. The numbers today are breathtaking in their implications. According to the Pew Research Center's 2023 data, only 63% of Americans now identify as Christian, a drop of nearly 30 percentage points since 1950. More shocking still, among Americans under 30, the percentage identifying as Christian has fallen to just 49%. For the first time in American history, Christians are approaching minority status among young adults. Church attendance tells an even more dramatic story. Weekly attendance has plummeted to just 27% of the population. On any given Sunday, more Americans are shopping at Target than sitting in church pews. The most religious generation in American history, those born before 1945, is dying off, replaced by generations that view religion with increasing skepticism. Meanwhile, an extraordinary transformation has been taking place on the other side of the world. While America was losing its faith, the global South was finding it. Today, there are more Christians in Nigeria than in the entire United States. The Democratic Republic of Congo has more practicing Christians than Germany and the United Kingdom combined. Brazil's evangelical population is exploding at a rate that makes American megachurches look quaint. China presents perhaps the most stunning example of this global shift. Despite decades of communist suppression, underground Christian churches have flourished. Conservative estimates suggest there are now over 100 million Christians in China, nearly one-third of America's total Christian population. By 2030, China is projected to have the largest Christian population on Earth. The irony is breathtaking. The communist nation that once banned Bibles may soon have more Christians than the country that once called itself a Christian nation. South Korea tells a similar story. In 1945, Christians made up less than 2% of the population. Today, nearly 30% of South Koreans identify as Christian, and Korean missionaries are among the most active in the world. Korean churches are sending more missionaries to Muslim countries than American churches, a complete reversal of historical patterns. Africa represents Christianity's new heartland. Nigeria alone is home to over 95 million Christians. Uganda, Kenya, Ghana, and Rwanda have Christian populations that, as percentages of their total populations, dwarf anything in contemporary America. These African Christians aren't the liberal progressive Christians of mainstream American denominations. They're conservative, evangelical, and passionate about their faith in ways that would seem foreign to many American Christians today. The theological implications are profound. American Christianity, which once shaped global Christian doctrine, is now being shaped by it. When the Anglican Communion debates homosexuality or women's ordination, it's the African bishops who hold the conservative line while American Episcopalians push for liberal reforms. The student has become the teacher. What caused this great reversal? The factors are complex and interconnected, but several stand out with startling clarity. First, prosperity itself may have weakened American Christianity. Social scientists have long observed an inverse relationship between wealth and religious devotion. As Americans became more comfortable, they became less dependent on religion for hope, community, and meaning. The prosperity gospel, ironically, may have made Christianity less appealing by associating faith with material success rather than this spiritual transcendence. Second, education played a crucial role. As Americans became more educated, they became more skeptical of religious claims. Universities, once bastions of Christian thought, became centers of secular humanism. Students who arrived at college as believers often graduated as skeptics. The correlation between education levels and religious skepticism became so strong that some evangelicals began viewing higher education as a threat to faith. Third, scandals devastated institutional trust. Every fallen pastor, every abuse cover-up, every financial scandal drove another nail into the coffin of Christian credibility. Americans began asking, if Christianity is supposed to make people better, why do Christian leaders keep behaving badly? The gap between Christian ideals and Christian behavior became impossible to ignore. Fourth, political polarization toxified American Christianity. As evangelical leaders became increasingly associated with Republican politics, they alienated millions of Americans who disagreed with conservative political positions. Christianity became seen as a partisan affiliation rather than a universal faith. Young Americans, in particular, began viewing evangelical Christianity as more political than spiritual. But perhaps the most overlooked factor is generational trauma. The generation that came of age after 9/11 experienced something unprecedented. They watched their deeply Christian nation launch wars that killed hundreds of thousands of people in Muslim countries. They saw torture justified by Christian politicians. They witnessed Islamophobia preached from Christian pulpits. For many young Americans, Christianity became associated not with love and peace, but with violence and hypocrisy. Social media accelerated these trends exponentially. Stories of pastoral abuse, financial corruption, and political extremism now spread globally within hours. A scandal in one megachurch can damage Christianity's reputation nationwide. Young Americans, who get most of their news from social media, are constantly exposed to negative stories about Christianity while rarely encountering positive ones. The COVID-19 pandemic delivered what may have been the knockout punch. When churches closed while liquor stores remained open, many Americans concluded that their faith wasn't as essential as they had believed. Others were appalled when some Christian leaders demanded churches reopen despite public health concerns, suggesting they cared more about money than lives. The pandemic forced Americans to examine what they really believed, and millions concluded they could live without organized religion. Meanwhile, alternative spiritual practices flourished. Meditation apps gained millions of users. Yoga studios multiplied like churches once did. Young Americans began identifying as spiritual but not religious at unprecedented rates. They wanted transcendence without dogma, community without commitment, meaning without moral judgment. The rise of the knowns, Americans who claim no religious affiliation, represents perhaps the most significant religious trend in American history. From just 5% of the population in 1970, knowns now comprise over 23% of Americans and nearly 40% of those under 30. This isn't a temporary rebellion, it's a permanent shift in American religious identity. What does this mean for America's role in global Christianity? The implications are staggering. American missionary organizations, once the primary force for global Christian evangelization, are struggling to recruit young missionaries. Financial donations to foreign missions are declining as American Christians age and die. The theological influence that American seminaries once wielded globally is waning as African and Asian Christians develop their own theological traditions. Perhaps most significantly, the moral authority that America once claimed as a Christian nation has evaporated. When American politicians invoke Christian values to justify policies, the rest of the world increasingly responds with skepticism rather than respect. How can America claim to be a Christian nation when most young Americans aren't even Christian? The political ramifications are equally profound. The religious right, which dominated American politics for decades, is facing an existential crisis. As their demographic base shrinks, their political influence wanes. The 2020 election marked a turning point. For the first time since the 1970s, the more secular candidate won decisively. Young voters who broke overwhelmingly for secular candidates sent a clear message about America's religious future. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. Just as American Christianity was losing its global dominance, something remarkable was happening in the immigrant communities that were supposedly hastening its decline. Latino immigrants, many of them Catholic or Pentecostal, were revitalizing American Christianity with a passion and authenticity that had been missing for decades. Asian immigrants were planting churches that combined ancient Christian traditions with contemporary relevance. African immigrants brought a vibrant, supernatural Christianity that made American evangelicalism look tame by comparison. These new Americans aren't just joining existing churches, they're transforming them. Spanish-language services now outnumber English services in many American cities. Korean Presbyterian churches are among the fastest growing denominations in America. Nigerian Anglican priests are being sent to revitalize dying American parishes. The irony is palpable. The very immigration that weakened Christian America's demographic dominance may also be its salvation. While white American Christianity declines, immigrant Christianity flourishes. The question isn't whether Christianity will survive in America, but what form it will take. This transformation reflects a broader global pattern. Christianity is becoming less Western and more diverse, less white and more colorful, less culturally Christian and more genuinely faithful. The center of Christian gravity has shifted from the global North to the global South, from America and Europe to Africa and Asia. The theological implications are revolutionary. For centuries, Christianity was shaped by European and American thinkers. Augustine was North African, but most influential Christian theologians were white Europeans or Americans. That's changing rapidly. Today's most influential Christian voices are increasingly African, Asian, and Latin American. Their theological perspectives, shaped by poverty, persecution, and cultural diversity, are challenging Western Christian assumptions about everything from prosperity to suffering to the role of the supernatural in daily life. African theologians are developing liberation theologies that make American progressive Christianity look conservative. Asian Christians are creating contextual theologies that integrate Christian faith with Confucian ethics and Buddhist compassion. Latin American Pentecostals are experiencing supernatural phenomena that would make American charismatics uncomfortable. The Christianity of the future will be more mystical, more supernatural, and more politically radical than the Christianity of America's past. This shift has profound implications for Christian unity. The World Council of Churches, once dominated by American and European denominations, is increasingly influenced by global South perspectives. When global Christian bodies meet to discuss human sexuality, women's ordination, or social justice, it's no longer American voices that dominate the conversation. The decline of American Christian influence also affects Christian persecution globally. For decades, the United States used its political and economic power to protect Christian minorities around the world. As America becomes less Christian and less influential globally, persecuted Christians have fewer powerful advocates. This is particularly evident in the Middle East, where ancient Christian communities are disappearing while American attention focuses elsewhere. But perhaps the most profound change is cultural. American Christianity once set the global standard for Christian culture, from music to literature to film. Christian rock, contemporary worship, and mega-church architecture were American exports that shaped Christianity worldwide. That cultural influence is waning as American Christianity loses its vitality and creativity. Instead, African worship music is influencing global Christianity. Asian Christian art is gaining international recognition. Latin American Christian literature is challenging American Christian assumptions about faith and culture. The cultural flow has reversed. Instead of America exporting Christian culture, it's importing it. The educational implications are equally significant. American Christian universities once attracted students from around the world who returned home to spread American Christian values. Now, many of these institutions are struggling financially as American Christian enrollment declines. Meanwhile, Christian universities in Africa and Asia are experiencing explosive growth, developing their own theological traditions without American influence. This educational shift affects missionary training as well. American missionary schools, which once trained the majority of global missionaries, are seeing declining enrollment as fewer American Christians feel called to overseas service. Meanwhile, mission training centers in Korea, Nigeria, and Brazil are producing missionaries who are often more effective than their American counterparts because they better understand poverty, persecution, and cultural adaptation. The technological revolution has also democratized Christian influence. American Christian media once dominated global Christian communications through radio, television, and publishing. Now, a pastor in Lagos can reach more people through social media than many American megachurch pastors. Brazilian Christian influencers have larger global followings than American Christian celebrities. The technological playing field has been leveled, and Americans are no longer the dominant players. Where does this leave America? The data suggests we're witnessing not just the decline of Christian America, but its fundamental transformation. The white, Protestant, culturally dominant Christianity that defined America for centuries is dying. But something new is being born from the ashes. A more diverse, more global, potentially more authentic Christianity that reflects America's changing demographics. The question isn't whether Christianity will survive in America. It will. The question is whether American Christians will adapt to their new role as participants rather than leaders in global Christianity. This requires humility that doesn't come naturally to a people accustomed to spiritual superiority. Young Americans, in particular, seem open to this new paradigm. While they're rejecting the institutional Christianity of their parents, many are interested in ancient Christian practices like contemplative prayer, liturgical worship, and social justice activism. They want Christianity without cultural baggage, faith without politics, spirituality without hypocrisy. This could actually strengthen American Christianity in the long run. When Christianity was culturally dominant, it attracted many nominal believers who were Christian in name only. As Christianity becomes countercultural, it may attract more genuine believers who are willing to pay the social cost of faith. Quality may replace quantity. The global implications of America's Christian decline extend far beyond religion. For centuries, American foreign policy was influenced by Christian values and assumptions. American presidents routinely invoked Christian principles to justify international interventions. American aid organizations were often Christian. American cultural exports carried Christian undertones. As America becomes less Christian, its foreign policy is becoming more secular and pragmatic. This isn't necessarily bad, but it represents a fundamental shift in how America engages the world. Other nations, particularly in the global South where Christianity is growing, are stepping into the moral leadership vacuum that America is leaving behind. The economic implications are also significant. American Christian organizations once dominated global Christian finance, from mission funding to Christian development work. As American Christianity declines, these funding streams are diminishing. Meanwhile, Korean, Brazilian, and Nigerian Christian organizations are becoming major players in global Christian finance. This financial shift affects everything from seminary education in developing countries to disaster relief operations. American Christian organizations that once operated globally are scaling back their international work due to declining donations from aging American Christians. The global Christian infrastructure that America built and funded for decades is being forced to find new sources of support. Perhaps most importantly, America's loss of Christian identity affects its own social cohesion. Whatever one thinks of Christianity's truth claims, there's no denying that it provided a common cultural foundation for American society for centuries. Shared Christian holidays, values, and narratives helped unite Americans across ethnic and regional differences. As Christianity loses its cultural dominance, America is struggling to find new sources of unity. Political polarization has intensified, partly because Americans no longer share basic assumptions about morality, meaning, and purpose. The civic religion that Christianity provided is dying, and nothing has replaced it. This creates opportunities for both renewal and conflict. On one hand, America might develop a more inclusive civil religion that draws from multiple traditions. On the other hand, the loss of shared values might accelerate social fragmentation and political extremism. The story of American Christianity's decline isn't just about religion. It's about identity, power, culture, and the future of American civilization itself. We're living through one of the most significant cultural transformations in American history, comparable to the abolition of slavery or the Industrial Revolution. But remember, this isn't the end of the story. It's a new chapter. Christianity survived the fall of Rome, the Dark Ages, the Enlightenment, and 2 world wars. It will survive the decline of Christian America. The question is what form it will take and what role America will play in its future. One thing seems certain: the age of American Christian exceptionalism is over. America is becoming just another country where Christians live and worship alongside people of other faiths and no faith. For some, this is a tragedy. For others, it's an opportunity for Christianity to rediscover its prophetic voice and countercultural calling. The Global Christian Center has shifted from Washington to Lagos, from New York to Seoul, from Los Angeles to Sao Paulo. The future of Christianity will be written not in American seminaries, but in African churches, Asian universities, and Latin American-based communities. Americans who want to understand where Christianity is headed need to look beyond their borders to see what God is doing in the rest of the world. This transformation challenges everyone, Christians and non-Christians alike, to reconsider their assumptions about faith, culture, and national identity. America's loss of Christian dominance might ultimately benefit both America and global Christianity by forcing both to become more authentic, more diverse, and more humble. As we reach the end of this remarkable journey through one of history's great religious transformations, it's worth reflecting on what we've witnessed. We've seen how demographic shifts, cultural changes, and global dynamics can reshape religious landscapes in ways that would have seemed impossible just decades ago. Quick question for our Professor Archive community. I'm curious, where in the world are you watching this from? And what's your profession? Are you a teacher seeing these changes in your classroom? A pastor wrestling with declining attendance? Or maybe a young person trying to figure out your own relationship with faith? Drop a comment and let us know. I read every single one, and your perspectives always add so much depth to these discussions. The story of American Christianity's transformation reminds us that no religious or cultural dominance is permanent. Empires rise and fall, but ideas, beliefs, and traditions adapt and survive in new forms. The Christianity that emerges from America's current transformation may be smaller numerically, but stronger spiritually. It may be less politically powerful, but more prophetically authentic. If this deep dive into religious and cultural history resonates with you, and you'd like to see more content exploring how historical shifts shape our modern world, consider hitting that super thanks button. It really helps us here at Professor Archive continue producing these in-depth explorations of the forces that shape our world. The numbers tell us that American Christianity, as we've known it, is ending. But perhaps that's not a defeat. Perhaps it's a liberation. Free from the burden of cultural dominance, American Christians might rediscover what it means to be followers of a carpenter from Nazareth who had no political power, owned no property, and challenged every assumption about success and significance. The world's Christian stronghold has moved on from America, but the story of faith continues to unfold in unexpected places and surprising ways. And that, perhaps, is exactly how it should be.